Gregory Whitmore chose the center of the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers, donors in black tie, a string quartet still playing. He lifted his champagne glass and smiled, as if generosity belonged to him. "My wife," he said lightly, "has never understood real business. That's why I had to restructure everything." A ripple of polite laughter. Hadley Cox stood beside him, still composed, while the papers he had signed an hour earlier rested in a leather folder on the signing table behind them. He thought he had secured his future. He did not know the contract he had just handed over was funded entirely by her. And ink once dried does not forgive. If you believe dignity is louder than revenge, stay with this story. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your city. I read every comment. And if stories about quiet strength, justice, and consequences matter to you, consider subscribing. Some truths unfold slowly, and they're worth not missing. Hadley Cox had never needed to raise her voice to be heard. That was the first thing Gregory Whitmore had once admired about her. In the early years of their marriage, he had called it steadiness. Later, when ambition began to consume him, he called it passivity. Eventually, in private conversations with Vanessa Hale, he would call it limitation. Hadley called it discipline. She rose every morning at 6. Coffee, legal briefings, market summaries. A slim leather notebook opened beside her plate where she wrote in narrow, deliberate lines. Dates, times, observations, not accusations, not conclusions, just facts. She had been raised to understand the difference. The Cox family name did not circulate in tabloids, and Hadley preferred it that way. Cox Holdings operated through layers investment vehicles, endowment strategic funds with unremarkable names. The wealth had been built quietly over 3 generations in infrastructure, renewable energy, and municipal bonds. No flashy tech unicorns, no viral headlines. Stability, not spectacle. Hadley owned a controlling share. Gregory did not know that. When they married 8 years earlier, she had signed a prenuptial agreement Gregory barely skimmed. He had been proud, and then proud that he was marrying for love. Proud that he didn't need her money. She had admired that about him. At least she had wanted to. Gregory came from a respectable middle-class family in Ohio. His father had worked 40 years in logistics. His mother had been a school administrator. Gregory had learned early that success meant visibility, recognition, applause. He was intelligent, articulate, and restless. At 39, he stood on the edge of what he called his defining opportunity, a large-scale commercial development contract tied to a mixed-use waterfront revitalization project in Baltimore. Offices, retail, residential towers, public-private partnership. If secured, it would place him among executives who received invitations instead of requesting them. The project required capital backing, substantial enough to reassure municipal officials and private lenders. Gregory believed he had found that backing through a discreet investment fund called Harbor Crest Strategic Partners. Harbor Crest did not advertise. Harbor Crest did not attend galas. Harbor Crest did not grant interviews. Gregory never asked who ultimately controlled it. He only knew the funding terms were generous, structured, and precise. He told himself he had earned that confidence. Across town, in a glass building with no signage beyond a street number, Harbor Crest answered to Hadley Cox. The decision to finance Gregory's contract had not been impulsive. She had reviewed his proposal months earlier through internal channels. She had evaluated projections, risk exposure, compliance frameworks. She had removed herself from the emotional dimension of it. On paper, the deal was viable. Personally, it was a test. Gregory did not know he was being tested. Vanessa Hale entered the picture in stages. She was introduced as a marketing consultant, sharp-poised, known for repositioning struggling brands into something aspirational. She wore structured blazers and confidence like it had been custom-tailored. She listened carefully. She laughed strategically. Hadley met her twice at company dinners. Vanessa maintained eye contact just a second longer than necessary when Gregory spoke. She praised his vision in language that suggested partnership rather than employment. "It's rare to see leadership like this," Vanessa had said once, her tone warm, almost intimate. Hadley had written the sentence down that night, not because of jealousy, because patterns begin with phrases. At first, Gregory mentioned Vanessa casually. She's efficient. She understands momentum. She doesn't get bogged down in hesitation. The last remark had been delivered while Gregory glanced at Hadley's open notebook. Hadley had not responded. She had simply written, November 14th, 9:42 p.m. comparison implied. Over the following weeks, Gregory's schedule shifted. Late meetings, weekend strategy sessions, out-of-town site inspections that required overnight stays. Hadley never asked for details he did not volunteer. Instead, she observed the cadence of his explanations, the speed, the omissions, the slight recalibrations in tone when Vanessa's name surfaced. She checked nothing illegally. She accessed nothing improperly. But she knew how to read corporate filings. She knew how to interpret expense categories. She understood the rhythm of digital correspondence. It was not difficult to notice when consulting fees began appearing with increasing frequency. Gregory's demeanor at home grew sharper, more impatient. "You don't understand the scale of this," he told her one evening as he paced the kitchen. Tie-loosened eyes bright with urgency. "This isn't theoretical investment strategy. This is real execution." Hadley closed her notebook slowly. "Execution requires structure," she said evenly. He exhaled as if she had proven his point. "That's what I'm building." He did not ask how she spent her mornings. He did not ask which boards she sat on, which votes she cast, which capital flows she approved. He assumed her quiet was absence. In reality, it was assessment. At Harbor Crest, Hadley convened a private review meeting with 2 senior analysts. She did not mention Gregory's name. She referred to the Baltimore project by file number. "Update me on compliance exposure," she instructed. Minimal, one analyst replied. "Unless executive authority shifts without board approval." Hadley nodded once. "Monitor executive authority clauses," she said. That evening, Gregory arrived home later than usual. His cologne was unfamiliar, not inappropriate, just different. Subtle changes rarely announced themselves loudly. He seemed energized. "We're close," he told her. "Harbor Crest is finalizing terms." Hadley met his gaze. "That's good." He smiled in a way that suggested victory had already been secured. "You know," he added lightly, "Vanessa says we need to move fast before the market shifts. Hesitation kills leverage." Hadley considered the word hesitation. She wrote it down after he went upstairs. In the weeks that followed, Vanessa's presence expanded beyond strategy. She began attending internal executive meetings. She revised presentation decks. She spoke as though she occupied a seat beside Gregory rather than across from him. During one dinner at a private restaurant near the inner harbor, Vanessa leaned forward across the table and said, "Gregory deserves partners who match his pace." Hadley noticed the plural. She did not correct it. The funding vehicle behind Harbor Crest required final sign-off from the beneficial owner before releasing the second tranche of capital. Hadley signed the authorization electronically. She did not hesitate. She wanted to see what Gregory would do when he believed momentum belonged solely to him. One afternoon, a misdirected email arrived in Gregory's inbox and remained briefly visible on the shared home desktop before he deleted it. Hadley did not read the full contents. She read enough. "Once everything is transferred, there's no going back." Vanessa's name appeared below the message. Hadley closed the screen. She did not confront him. Instead, she opened her notebook. December 3rd, 6:18 p.m. phrase. "Everything is transferred." Across the city, Gregory believed he was ascending. He had no idea that the structure beneath him was reinforced and owned by the woman he had begun to underestimate. And Hadley, who had financed his opportunity without demanding recognition, was no longer evaluating the project. She was evaluating the man. Gregory Whitmore believed in momentum. He believed that once a door opened, hesitation was a form of weakness. That was how he justified the speed at which he moved through documents, meetings, and increasingly decisions. The formal contract signing with Harbor Crest Strategic Partners was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in early January. Snow lined the Baltimore sidewalks in muted gray ridges, melting into slush beneath polished shoes. Inside the conference room, the air was warm, filtered neutral. Neutrality comforted Gregory. It felt like professionalism. Vanessa Hale arrived 10 minutes before him, already seated at the far end of the table, tablet open, stylus poised. "You're early," Gregory said, pleased. "I like to understand the room before the room understands me," she replied, offering him a quick, knowing smile. The representatives from Harbor Crest entered shortly after, 2 senior legal officers and a compliance director. Polite, efficient, impeccably brief. None of them mentioned Hadley Cox. They didn't need to. The contract packet was thick but orderly. Tabs separated sections: capital contribution, governance structure, risk allocation, executive authority, reassignment clauses. Gregory flipped directly to the financial summary. "That's the number that matters," he said lightly. Vanessa leaned closer. "Scan the authority sections too," she murmured. "We should ensure flexibility." Flexibility. The word sounded progressive, strategic. He skimmed the executive authority clause. It outlined decision-making powers, conditions under which authority could be delegated, and circumstances requiring board consent. The language was precise, but Gregory read it with confidence rather than caution. He had negotiated most of these terms already, or so he believed. "What about reassignment?" Vanessa asked, her tone casual but deliberate. Gregory turned to the tab. Reassignment of rights required written consent from Harbor Crest's governing authority if any controlling interest shifted to a third party. It also stipulated that personal guarantees attached to the original signatory would remain binding regardless of internal restructuring. Gregory frowned slightly. "Standard protection language," one of Harbor Crest's legal officers said calmly. "We safeguard continuity." Vanessa tapped her stylus against the tablet. "Continuity is important, but agility matters too. If Gregory needs to bring in a strategic partner, we wouldn't want bureaucracy slowing growth." The compliance director responded without emotion. "Strategic partners are welcome. Control, however, cannot be transferred without consent." Gregory nodded. That seemed reasonable. He wasn't planning to transfer control. Not yet. He signed the first set of documents with steady handwriting, ink pressed into fiber. Each signature felt like elevation. Across town, in a private office overlooking the Potomac, Hadley Cox watched the digital confirmation appear on her secure screen. Executed. She did not smile. She enlarged the PDF copy of the signed agreement and read it again, not for comprehension, but for emphasis. Her eyes lingered on the clauses Gregory had skimmed. Personal guarantees remain binding. Control reassignment requires governing authority, consent. Dissolution triggers immediate capital review. She closed the file and opened her notebook. January 9th, 10:42 a.m. Gregory signed full execution copy. There was no tremor in her handwriting. That evening, Gregory returned home carrying a bottle of champagne. "We're officially backed," he announced, setting the bottle on the kitchen island as if it were a trophy. Hadley looked up from the financial report she had been reviewing unrelated to his project. "That's good," she said. He studied her expression. "That's it." She met his gaze calmly. "It's a significant step." He exhaled, half laughing. "Sometimes I can't tell if you're impressed or indifferent." "Does it matter?" she asked. He hesitated, then shrugged. "Not tonight." They drank in the living room. Gregory spoke about projected returns, expansion phases, public recognition. Vanessa's name appeared frequently, her strategic insights, her late-night dedication, her understanding of real leverage. Hadley listened without interruption. When Gregory described Vanessa reviewing sections of the contract before signing, Hadley's eyes flickered only once. "She's thorough," Gregory said. "She catches things." "I'm sure she does," Hadley replied evenly. He did not notice that she had not asked what things. Over the next several weeks, the project accelerated. Press releases were drafted. Architectural renderings circulated. Vanessa began appearing in internal emails as a de facto executive voice. Gregory increasingly consulted her before making decisions, sometimes before informing his own board. Hadley observed the shift through indirect channels. Harbor Crest's oversight reports arrived weekly. Capital disbursement schedules, vendor approvals, insurance confirmations. One report flagged an unusual expense consulting fee. Hale Strategic Advisory, LLC. The amount was not excessive, but the frequency had increased. Hadley forwarded the line item to Harbor Crest's internal audit division with a simple note. Clarify scope of services. She did not add commentary. Meanwhile, Gregory began spending more nights in Baltimore. It's easier than commuting, he explained. We're in critical phase, Hadley nodded. On a Thursday evening, Gregory left his laptop open on the dining table while showering. A notification illuminated the screen briefly before fading. Vanessa Hale. Once authority shifts, everything flows through us. Hadley did not touch the keyboard. She did not open the message. She memorized the sentence. Authority shifts. That phrase returned to her later that night when she reviewed the contract again. Authority could only shift with Harbor Crest's consent, and Harbor Crest answered to her. Gregory, however, began imagining alternative structures. What if he said one night over dinner, "We restructure executive oversight for efficiency, temporary delegation"? Nothing dramatic. Delegation to whom? Hadley asked quietly. Someone who understands market optics. Vanessa. He did not deny it. She's invested in the success of this, he replied. Sometimes an outside perspective prevents stagnation. Hadley closed her notebook. Be careful what you reassign, she said. He interpreted the remark as skepticism. You worry too much about risk, he said. Growth requires trust. Trust. The words settled between them like an object neither intended to pick up. Hadley did not argue. Instead, she scheduled a private consultation with Eleanor Grant. In Eleanor's office walls lined with casebooks and framed degrees, Hadley laid out the facts without emotion. No confrontation, Eleanor asked gently. Not yet, Hadley replied. Eleanor reviewed the Harbor Crest contract, scanning the sections Gregory had minimized. He cannot transfer controlling interest without triggering review, Eleanor said. If he attempts to circumvent it, becomes breach. Hadley nodded once. I want documentation, she said, not assumptions. Eleanor's expression sharpened with professional focus. Then we document. As winter deepened, Gregory's confidence swelled. He spoke of expansion beyond Baltimore, of national partnerships, of recognition panels and keynote invitations. Vanessa stood closer to him at events now, sometimes too close. At a private investor dinner, Gregory introduced Vanessa not as consultant, but as my strategic counterpart. Hadley heard it. She wrote it down. January 27th. Public introduction, strategic counterpart. The shift was no longer subtle. Gregory believed he was constructing something grand, something independent of the quiet woman who sat across from him each night. He did not know that the structure beneath him was conditional. He did not know that the authority he considered transferable was anchored in terms he had barely read. And he did not know that the person most capable of halting his ascent had already begun preparing the file that would define its limit. Hadley did not need to interrupt his momentum. She only needed to let it continue just far enough. Distance rarely announces itself. It accumulates. By February, Gregory Whitmore no longer asked Hadley what time she would be home. He assumed she would be there before him. He assumed the lights in the kitchen would be on. He assumed dinner would be quiet. He was correct on all three counts. Hadley Cox had adjusted to the new rhythm without complaint. She set one place at the dining table most evenings. Sometimes she ate before he arrived. Sometimes she waited not out of longing, but observation. She tracked patterns. February 2nd, 11:18 p.m. arrival. Smell of unfamiliar cologne. February 5th, overnight strategy session. Hotel charge billed to corporate account. February 8th, increased transfer to Hale Strategic Advisory, LLC. The entries were brief, clinical. She did not attach adjectives. At Harbor Crest, oversight reports continued arriving with mechanical consistency. The Baltimore development moved into early execution phases, zoning confirmations, contractor retainers, environmental compliance filings. Gregory was performing well externally. Municipal stakeholders praised his decisiveness. Investors appreciated his optimism. Internally, however, something had shifted. Executive authority emails began routing Vanessa into conversations previously limited to Gregory and senior officers. She spoke assertively, recommending messaging pivots, timeline compressions, vendor substitutions. Hadley read every forwarded oversight summary without reacting. On a gray Monday morning, she scheduled a meeting with Eleanor Grant. Eleanor's office overlooked a Winter Bear Park in Georgetown. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and lemon polish. Eleanor listened without interruption as Hadley outlined recent developments. "He's increasing her involvement," Hadley said calmly, "financially and structurally." "Has he transferred equity?" Eleanor asked. "Not formally, but he's considering it." "Yes." Eleanor tapped her pen lightly against a legal pad. "We need to establish a documentation trail before any official reassignment attempt." "I've been documenting," Hadley replied. Eleanor's eyes softened, though her tone remained professional. "I don't doubt that." Hadley placed a slim folder on the desk. Inside were printed copies of expense summaries, timestamp logs, and 3 emails Vanessa had mistakenly carbon copied to broader internal distribution before retracting them. Eleanor scanned one. "Once we streamline authority, we won't need external oversight." She raised an eyebrow. "That language is aggressive." "Define streamline," Hadley said quietly. Eleanor closed the folder. "If Gregory attempts to reassign executive control without Harbor Crest's consent, it triggers breach provisions. Personal guarantees remain intact. That could expose him significantly." Hadley nodded once. "I'm aware." Eleanor studied her for a moment. "Are you protecting the project or preparing for separation?" Hadley's expression did not change. "I'm preparing for clarity." That evening, Gregory returned home earlier than usual. "We're restructuring internal reporting lines," he announced, removing his coat. "It's efficient." Hadley poured him a glass of water before responding. "In what way?" "Vanessa will oversee strategic communications directly. It removes bottlenecks." "Is she an executive officer?" Functionally, Gregory said, a hint of impatience entering his voice. "Titles are fluid." "Fluid." Hadley wrote the word down later. He did not notice. Over the following week, Gregory's tone at home shifted from defensive to dismissive. "You don't understand how modern growth works," he said one night, when Hadley asked a neutral question about board approval procedures. "It requires agility." "Agility without consent can become exposure," she replied evenly. He laughed softly. "You always see exposure." "I see structure," she said. He shook his head as though she were clinging to outdated caution. What Gregory did not realize was that Harbor Crest's governing authority, unseen to him, had already flagged irregularities in reporting. Daniel Reeves, a forensic accountant retained quietly by Harbor Crest, began analyzing transaction flows tied to Hale Strategic Advisory, LLC. Daniel was meticulous. He traced payments through layered transfers, cross-referencing consulting invoices against deliverables. The invoices were vague. Brand alignment strategy. Market acceleration advisory. No detailed scopes attached. He compiled his findings into a preliminary report and sent it through secure internal channels. The report landed on Hadley's encrypted device at 6:02 a.m. She read it while the house remained silent. Total transfers to Hale Strategic Advisory LLC over 8 weeks, $742,000. Percentage increase month over month 38%. Correlation between transfer dates and executive authority emails significant. Hadley closed the file and opened her notebook. February 14th. Escalation confirmed. There was no tremor in her hand. Later that afternoon, Gregory called from Baltimore. Harbor Crest wants additional oversight clarification, he said, irritation evident. "It's slowing things down." "In what way?" Hadley asked calmly. "They're questioning consulting allocations." "Are the allocations documented?" "Yes, of course," he replied quickly. She allowed the silence to stretch half a second longer than comfortable. "Then, clarification shouldn't be difficult." He exhaled sharply. "Sometimes I feel like everyone expects me to justify success." "Accountability is not accusation," she said. He did not respond. That weekend, Gregory did not come home. He texted late Saturday night, staying near site. Early meeting. Hadley did not ask for proof. Instead, she reviewed public hotel booking data tied to the corporate card statement. The hotel in question was not near the construction site. It was across the harbor, closer to the restaurant district. She wrote it down. February 17th. Location discrepancy. On Monday, Vanessa sent an internal email marked confidential. Subject Authority Optimization Proposal. The proposal outlined a temporary executive authority reassignment, granting Vanessa co-signature capacity for strategic vendor contracts. Hadley read the proposal 3 times. Temporary. Optimization. Co-signature. The language was crafted to appear procedural, but embedded within the document was a clause referencing anticipated external capital realignment. External capital. Harbor Crest. Hadley forwarded the document to Eleanor. Within an hour, Eleanor called. If he signs this without Harbor Crest's explicit consent, he breaches the governance clause, Eleanor said. And if funds continue flowing to her LLC under expanded authority, it could constitute dissipation. Hadley listened. Prepare documentation, she said. Are you ready to act? Not yet. Gregory arrived home Tuesday evening with visible strain around his eyes. We're on the edge of something major, he said. But people keep interfering. Who? Hadley asked. Investors, compliance. Everyone wants control. She held his gaze. Control exists to protect. He looked at her, then really looked, and something flickered behind his confidence. A brief uncertainty. It vanished quickly. You always think in terms of protection, he said. I think in terms of expansion. He did not realize those two instincts were about to collide. Across town, Daniel finalized a second report. It detailed not only the payments to Vanessa's LLC, but also overlapping travel dates between Gregory and Vanessa that aligned with expense claims. The pattern was no longer incidental. Daniel labeled the file Potential Fiduciary Risk Exposure. It was sent directly to Harbor Crest's governing authority, to Hadley. She read it without visible reaction. Outside, winter light faded early, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors of her home. Gregory believed momentum was carrying him forward. He did not understand that momentum without foundation becomes acceleration toward collapse. And Hadley, who had financed his rise without demanding acknowledgement, was no longer observing merely as a wife. She was observing as the sole authority capable of stopping him. By the time Gregory Whitmore began speaking about optimization, the word had already lost its innocence. He used it frequently now at board meetings, in interviews across dinner tables, where he no longer waited for Hadley to finish her sentences. Optimization meant removing friction. It meant accelerating progress. It meant transferring certain burdens to people who understood scale. It meant Vanessa. On a Wednesday evening in late February, Gregory placed a slim folder on the kitchen counter as if it were routine paperwork. Just a few internal adjustments, he said. Temporary delegations. It'll help streamline vendor approvals. Hadley dried her hands carefully before touching the folder. She did not open it immediately. Is this related to Harbor Crest? She asked. In part, he replied. It's procedural. Nothing dramatic. Nothing dramatic. She opened the folder and skimmed the headings. Executive Authority Adjustment Addendum. Co-signature Authorization Framework. Advisory Compensation Realignment. The language was polished careful. It positioned Vanessa Hale as a strategic operations partner, authorized to execute contracts up to a specified financial threshold without prior board approval, provided certain conditions were anticipated. The word was deliberate. It allowed interpretation. Has Harbor Crest approved this structure? Hadley asked evenly. Gregory leaned against the counter. They don't need to approve internal efficiency. If authority shifts, they do. He smiled thinly. You're thinking in absolutes again. I'm thinking in contracts, she replied. He exhaled sharply, frustration flickering across his face. You always assume risk. Sometimes you have to trust the people who are helping you build something. Trust is not a substitute for governance, Hadley said quietly. Gregory's jaw tightened. Vanessa understands this project in ways you don't, he said. She's invested. Hadley met his gaze without blinking. In what capacity? He hesitated half a beat too long. In every capacity that matters. The sentence settled between them like a disclosure disguised as defensiveness. Hadley did not react. She turned another page of the addendum. If I sign this, she said calmly, what changes legally? Nothing significant, Gregory replied quickly. It's temporary authority sharing. Authority sharing, she repeated softly. He interpreted her tone as reluctance. Hadley, he said, voice lowering. You don't need to be suspicious of everything. Suspicion implied emotion. This was not emotion. This was documentation. I would like a full copy, she said. It's right there. A certified copy, she clarified. Gregory stared at her. It's internal. Then certification shouldn't be difficult. He hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Fine. Later that night, after Gregory went upstairs, Hadley opened her notebook. February 26th. Proposal co-signature authorization. Emotional defensiveness increased. She closed the notebook and opened her encrypted tablet. Within minutes, she forwarded a scanned copy of the addendum to Eleanor Grant. The response came early the next morning. This is not minor, Eleanor said over the phone. If he executes this without Harbor Crest consent, he triggers review and potentially breach. He believes it's procedural, Hadley replied. Belief doesn't override contract language. Hadley remained silent. Eleanor's voice softened slightly. Are you prepared for what enforcement looks like? Hadley looked out the window at the pale winter sky. Yes. Across town, Daniel Reeves continued tracing financial flows. A new transfer had cleared overnight. $310,000 to Hale Strategic Advisory, LLC. The memo line read, Performance Acceleration Incentive. Daniel compared the date to internal emails. It aligned precisely with Vanessa's submission of the Authority Optimization Proposal. He compiled the correlation into a supplemental report. When the document reached Hadley, she read it twice. Correlation does not prove intent, but pattern establishes direction. That afternoon, Gregory called unexpectedly. Harbor Crest is requesting clarification again, he said, irritation barely concealed. They're overreaching. What clarification? Hadley asked. They want justification for consulting fee escalations. Can you justify them? Of course, he snapped. Vanessa's value is measurable. In what metrics? He paused. Strategic positioning, brand elevation. Revenue increase, Hadley asked. Not yet. That's long term. Silence filled the line. You sound like them, Gregory muttered. I sound like governance, she replied. He ended the call abruptly. That evening, Gregory did not come home. Instead, an email notification flashed briefly across the shared calendar screen before being removed. Dinner, VH, private. Hadley memorized the time. She did not screenshot. She did not intrude. Instead, she opened Harbor Crest's governance portal and reviewed the Executive Authority Clause again. Section 8.4. Transfer or delegation of control. Any reassignment of executive authority impacting capital oversight requires written consent from the governing authority. The governing authority was a single signatory, Hadley Cox. She closed the document and contacted Eleanor. I want to ensure immediate response capability, she said. If he signs, we can prepare a notice of breach in advance, Eleanor replied. Conditional filing. Prepare it. Meanwhile, Gregory sat across from Vanessa in a dimly lit restaurant overlooking the harbor. You're hesitating because of her, Vanessa said quietly. She questions everything, Gregory replied. She doesn't understand scale. She understands control, he corrected. Vanessa leaned forward slightly. Control is fear dressed as caution, she said. You need partners who believe in momentum. He looked at her, searching for affirmation. I believe in you, she added softly. The sentence landed with greater force than it should have. Gregory nodded slowly. I'll execute the addendum this week, he said. Vanessa smiled. Back home, Hadley wrote another line in her notebook. March 1st. Anticipated execution within week. There was no tremor. The following Monday, Gregory requested a formal signing session at his legal office in Baltimore. He framed it as administrative. Hadley agreed to attend. The conference room was smaller than the Harbor Crest signing had been, but no less deliberate. A notary sat quietly at the end of the table. Vanessa occupied the chair beside Gregory, not across, not behind. Beside, Hadley observed the seating arrangement before sitting down. The addendum lay open. Gregory signed first. His pen moved confidently. Vanessa signed as witness and designated co-authority. The notary stamped the document with methodical precision. Gregory turned to Hadley. We'll need your acknowledgement, he said. Acknowledgement of what she asked. Internal awareness. She read the acknowledgement clause carefully. It did not require her approval, only recognition that the delegation had occurred. She signed. not because she agreed, but because documentation required clarity. As the notary sealed the final page, Hadley's phone vibrated softly. A secure notification from Harbor Crest. Authority reassignment detected. Review triggered. She slipped the phone back into her purse without expression. Gregory smiled at Vanessa. "It's done," he said. Yes, it was, but not in the way he imagined. Hadley stood gathered her certified copy and thanked the notary politely. She did not confront. She did not accuse. She simply left the building knowing that the moment Gregory had believed would strengthen his control had in fact activated the mechanism that would test it. Outside, the air was sharp with early March wind. Momentum unchecked often feels like progress, until governance intervenes. And governance in this case had already begun. The review was automatic. That was the part Gregory never understood about institutional structures. Systems did not react emotionally. They responded to triggers. When the Executive Authority Adjustment Addendum was uploaded into Harbor Crest's monitoring portal, it activated a compliance sequence embedded months earlier. The algorithm did not consider loyalty. It did not consider ambition. It flagged deviation. At 7:12 a.m., Daniel Reeves received a priority notification. Executive authority shift. Pending validation. Related financial transfers elevated. He opened the file and cross-referenced the timeline. Authority reassignment executed March 3rd, 11:42 a.m. Consulting transfer. March 3rd, 12:18 p.m. $410,000. The proximity was no longer coincidental. Daniel compiled the data into a structured memo titled Potential Breach Exposure, Immediate Review Recommended. By 8:03 a.m., the memo reached Hadley. She read it while seated at the kitchen table Gregory had left hours earlier without finishing his coffee. The report was factual, clean, undramatic. Total transfers to Hale Strategic Advisory LLC since January 1. $462,000. Percentage increase post-authority shift 27% within 24 hours. Correlation between decision-making power and compensation direct. Hadley closed the report. She opened her notebook. March 3rd. Authority shift executed. Transfer spike confirmed. There was no commentary beside the line. Later that afternoon, Gregory called her. "You'll probably get a formal inquiry from Harbor Crest," he said, voice clipped. "It's procedural. Inquiry regarding what Hadley asked. Consulting alignment. They're being cautious." "Are you concerned?" she asked. "No," he replied too quickly. "It's routine." She allowed silence to expand. "If it's routine, it won't be disruptive," she said evenly. He exhaled sharply. "You always sound like you're observing from outside." "I am," she replied. He did not know how literal that statement was. At Harbor Crest headquarters, compliance officers drafted a notice of clarification request. The language was restrained. Pursuant to Section 8.4, governing authority requires documentation supporting executive delegation and associated financial disbursements. The letter was transmitted to Gregory's office electronically and via certified courier. Vanessa saw it first. "This is intimidation," she said, reading the document in Gregory's office. "They're trying to reassert dominance." "It's standard," Gregory insisted, though his confidence had thinned. "They're questioning your judgment," she pressed. Gregory's jaw tightened. "They're questioning structure," he said. "Then respond firmly," Vanessa advised. "Don't concede control." Control. The word had begun to echo too frequently. Meanwhile, Hadley met with Eleanor Grant and Daniel Reeves in Eleanor's office. Daniel projected spreadsheets onto a muted screen. "These transfers escalate precisely when Vanessa's authority increases," he said calmly. "There's no measurable revenue justification." Eleanor folded her hands. "If Harbor Crest determines misuse of delegated authority, they can freeze disbursements immediately," she said. "Personal guarantees remain enforceable." Hadley listened without interruption. "What is our exposure?" she asked. Daniel replied, "Minimal. The structure protects capital. Gregory's personal liability increases, not yours." Eleanor studied Hadley carefully. "You understand what enforcement implies," she said. "Yes," Hadley replied. "It implied public documentation, legal filings, disclosure of ownership structures. It implied that Gregory would learn who Harbor Crest ultimately answered to. But timing mattered." "Wait for formal response," Hadley said quietly. Let him answer first. Gregory drafted his reply that evening with Vanessa seated beside him. He framed the consulting payments as performance incentives tied to projected growth metrics. He justified the authority shift as necessary operational agility. He did not attach detailed deliverables. He did not provide revenue correlation. He signed the response with irritation, disguised as confidence. 3 days later, Harbor Crest issued a secondary review notice. This one was firmer. Failure to substantiate compliance may result in suspension of capital disbursement pending investigation. Gregory stared at the language. They're threatening the project, he muttered. They're testing your resolve, Vanessa countered. They're risking their own investment. Vanessa's eyes sharpened. Unless they believe they hold leverage beyond capital. The idea unsettled him. What leverage, he asked. Governance leverage, she replied. They're protecting themselves. That night, Gregory did not return home. Hadley received a credit card alert at 10:46 p.m., a luxury hotel suite in Baltimore. She did not investigate further. Instead, she accessed Harbor Crest's secured portal and initiated a preparatory step Eleanor had advised. Conditional breach documentation, draft ready. The document outlined grounds for potential suspension of funding due to unauthorized delegation and questionable compensation patterns. It remained unfiled, but it existed. The following morning, Daniel sent another update. Audio documentation attached. The recording had been obtained legally through a company-monitored conference line. Gregory and Vanessa had forgotten the call was routed through corporate servers. Hadley listened. Vanessa's voice was clear. Once authority stabilizes under us, we won't need external interference. Harbor Crest can't dictate direction if we control execution. Gregory responded quietly. Once everything is reassigned, they'll have to accept it. The audio ended. Hadley removed her headphones slowly. She did not react outwardly. She wrote, March 8th. Intent established. Once everything is reassigned, intent changed exposure. Eleanor reviewed the recording later that afternoon. This strengthens misrepresentation and breach positioning, she said. They're acknowledging circumvention. Hadley nodded. Prepare formal notice, she said. Immediate filing, not yet. Gregory still believed negotiation was possible. He scheduled a meeting with Harbor Crest representatives to clarify misunderstandings. The meeting was set for the following week. He did not know the governing authority would attend virtually anonymously. On the morning of the meeting, Gregory adjusted his tie twice before entering the conference room. Vanessa stood beside him, composed. We push back, she whispered. Across the city, Hadley logged into the encrypted conference line. Her screen displayed only participant initials. The Harbor Crest compliance director opened the meeting. Mr. Whitmore, we require direct explanation regarding authority delegation and compensation alignment. Gregory spoke confidently at first. He framed Vanessa as essential to operational success. He described the authority shift as strategic necessity. When asked about revenue correlation, his answers blurred. When asked about projected deliverables tied to incentive payments, he hesitated. Vanessa intervened. We operate on growth anticipation, she said. Rigid oversight undermines agility. A pause followed. Then Hadley's voice, filtered through modulation software, entered the call for the first time. Anticipation does not override contract, she said evenly. Gregory frowned at the unfamiliar tone. And who is this, he asked. Governing authority, she replied. The room fell still. Gregory adjusted in his seat. With respect, he said, this project requires flexibility. And with respect, Hadley answered calmly, flexibility requires consent. Silence stretched. Provide substantiated documentation within 48 hours, she concluded, or capital suspension procedures will initiate. The call ended. Gregory looked at Vanessa. They won't suspend, he said, though uncertainty edged his voice. Vanessa's expression remained steady, but something calculated flickered behind her eyes. Back home that evening, Hadley closed her laptop and placed it beside her notebook. 48 hours. Momentum had carried Gregory forward for months. Now, governance had drawn a line, and for the first time, the structure he believed he controlled had begun to resist him. 48 hours is long enough for confidence to fracture. Gregory Whitmore spent the first 12 convincing himself that Harbor Crest was posturing. The second 12 drafting explanations that sounded strong until reread. The final 24, calculating how much of his authority had already been publicly exercised. Vanessa remained composed. "They won't suspend," she repeated. "They're too invested." Investment. Gregory clung to the word as though it were leverage. What he did not fully understand was that capital, when structured properly, protects itself first. In Eleanor Grant's office, the draft notice of breach was no longer conditional. It had been revised to active language. Daniel Reeves had appended updated transaction logs showing continued transfers to Hale Strategic Advisory LLC even after the compliance inquiry. March 10th, 9:14 a.m. $215,000. March 10th, 3:02 p.m. $98,000. The timing was not subtle. Hadley reviewed the compiled file in silence. "Continued disbursement after formal inquiry strengthens willful disregard," Eleanor said carefully. Hadley nodded. "Prepare suspension," she replied. "You're certain?" "Yes." She did not add emotion to the word. The suspension notice was transmitted electronically at 4:58 p.m., 2 hours before Gregory's deadline expired. Capital disbursement suspended pending investigation. All project funds were frozen immediately. Gregory learned of it from his CFO. "We can't access the next tranche," the CFO said over speakerphone. "Accounts are locked." "That's impossible," Gregory snapped. "They can't freeze mid-cycle." "They just did." Vanessa stood across from him in the office, arms folded. "This is escalation," she said quietly. Gregory ended the call and turned toward her. "They're overstepping." "No," she corrected calmly. "They're asserting." He ran a hand through his hair. "We respond aggressively." "With what?" Vanessa asked. "Liquidity." He didn't answer. Across town, Hadley sat at her desk reviewing the public impact forecast. The suspension would not destroy the project immediately. It would stall contractor payments, delay city inspections, create visible instability. It would pressure Gregory. She wrote in her notebook. March 10th, suspension executed. Response phase begins. That evening, Gregory came home earlier than he had in weeks. He did not remove his coat immediately. "They froze funding," he said flatly. "I heard," Hadley replied. He stared at her. "You heard?" "I follow market news. It's not public yet." She held his gaze. "Then it will be." He paced the living room. "This is sabotage." "Or compliance," she said evenly. He stopped. "You think this is justified?" "I think contracts matter." He laughed without humor. "You always reduce everything to paper." "Paper governs capital," she replied. He looked at her as though trying to measure something he had overlooked. "They're targeting Vanessa," he said. "Why?" Hadley asked. He hesitated. "Because she represents change, or because her compensation lacks correlation." His eyes narrowed. "You've been reviewing this." "I read what is available," she said calmly. He turned away. "We'll file injunction against suspension," he declared. "They can't freeze without proving breach." Hadley did not argue. Instead, she reached for her phone and sent a brief, encrypted message to Eleanor. "He intends injunction." The response came seconds later. "Prepared." The next morning, Gregory and Vanessa met with their legal counsel in Baltimore. They argued that Harbor Crest's suspension constituted bad faith interference. Their attorney requested documentation from Harbor Crest's governing authority. At 2:17 p.m., Eleanor Grant filed formal notice of breach on behalf of Harbor Crest. The document cited unauthorized executive delegation impacting capital oversight, failure to substantiate consulting compensation, recorded intent to circumvent governance protections. It also attached excerpts from the audio recording. When Gregory received the filing, the room seemed to constrict around him. "They recorded that call," he demanded. "It was on corporate infrastructure," their attorney replied evenly. "Monitoring disclosures are standard." Vanessa's composure faltered for the first time. "They can't weaponize internal dialogue," she said. "They can," the attorney responded, "if it reflects intent tied to fiduciary duty." Gregory sat back slowly. "This is disproportionate." "It's structural," the attorney corrected. Meanwhile, Hadley prepared for the next phase. Under Harbor Crest's governance structure, suspension allowed the governing authority to initiate asset review and potential removal of executive control pending investigation. Removal required formal hearing. She authorized it. March 12th. Executive review initiated. Gregory returned home late that night. He did not mention Vanessa. He did not mention the recording. He stood in the doorway of the bedroom, watching Hadley close her notebook. "You knew," he said quietly. Knew what she asked. That this would happen. She considered the question. "I knew contracts have consequences," she said. He stepped closer. "Are you enjoying this?" There it was. The assumption of malice. "No," she replied. "Then why do you sound untouched?" "Because emotion does not alter documentation." He stared at her as though searching for anger to fight against. There was none. The executive review hearing was scheduled for the following week. It would determine whether Gregory retained operational authority over the Baltimore project. He believed he could defend himself. Vanessa believed she could persuade. Hadley knew neither understood the structure they were standing inside. On the morning of the hearing, Gregory arrived at Harbor Crest's regional office for the first time. He had never been inside the building before. He had never needed to. The lobby was understated. Neutral stone, no corporate slogans. Vanessa walked beside him, confident but quieter than usual. They were escorted into a conference room where 3 compliance officers sat at one side of the table. A large screen at the far end flickered on. Participant Governing Authority. Gregory leaned forward. "Before we proceed," he said, "I want clarity regarding who holds final decision authority." A pause. Then the screen brightened. The camera resolved slowly. Hadley Cox appeared seated in a private office. Gregory recognized only vaguely from framed photographs at home. Recognition dawned not in shock, but in fragments. The building, the oversight tone, the modulation from the prior call. Vanessa's breath caught audibly. Gregory stared at the screen. "Hadley," he said, voice barely above a whisper. She regarded him calmly. "Yes." The compliance director spoke evenly. "Mr. Whitmore, the governing authority of Harbor Crest Strategic Partners, is Miss Hadley Cox." Silence flooded the room. Gregory's mind searched for denial and found none. "You funded this?" he asked. "Yes." "For how long?" "From inception." Vanessa shifted in her seat, color draining from her face. Gregory's expression fractured not into anger, but realization. "You never told me," he said. "You never asked," she replied. The hearing proceeded with procedural precision. Eleanor presented documentation. Daniel outlined financial discrepancies. The recording was replayed in full. Gregory listened to his own voice speak about reassignment. Vanessa avoided eye contact. When invited to respond, Gregory spoke more slowly than before. "I believed I was building something independently," he said. "You were building something," Hadley answered calmly. "Not independently." The compliance board recessed briefly. When they returned, the decision was delivered. Executive authority suspended pending civil review. Personal guarantees remain enforceable. Capital release contingent upon restitution assessment. Gregory sat motionless. Vanessa's composure collapsed into silence. Hadley did not smile. She simply ended the call. Momentum had carried Gregory forward until governance revealed its owner. And for the first time, he understood that the structure he had tried to reassign had always belonged to the woman he had dismissed. Silence does not always follow revelation. Sometimes it sharpens it. After the executive review hearing, Gregory Whitmore did not return home immediately. He remained seated in the conference room long after Vanessa had left to take a phone call she would not finish. The compliance officers gathered their documents with neutral professionalism. No one offered commentary. No one expressed sympathy. Structure does not comfort the people it corrects. Gregory finally stood and walked out of the building into cold March air that felt different than it had that morning. He had entered believing he was defending authority. He left understanding he had never possessed ultimate control. Across the city, Hadley Cox closed her laptop and placed both hands flat on her desk. There was no satisfaction in the movement, only completion. She opened her notebook. March 17th. Identity disclosed, authority suspended. She paused for a moment before adding, emotional reaction controlled. Later that evening, Gregory came home. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen where Hadley was preparing tea. The ordinary domestic quiet felt almost theatrical in contrast to what had occurred hours earlier. "You could have told me," he said. Hadley did not turn immediately. "You could have asked," she replied. He stepped forward. "How long were you planning to reveal this?" I wasn't planning to, she said calmly. You forced disclosure. His jaw tightened. I was building something real. And you were funded, she answered evenly. He ran a hand across his forehead. You watched me make decisions, knowing you held leverage. I watched you make decisions, knowing contracts held leverage. Don't reduce this to language. It is language, she said quietly. Signed language. He fell silent. For the first time in months, he did not argue. Meanwhile, Vanessa sat in her apartment reviewing the executive suspension notice for the 5th time. Executive authority suspended. Financial review pending. Potential fiduciary breach under examination. Her phone vibrated repeatedly. Vendors, media contacts, internal staff. She declined the calls. She replayed the recorded conference line in her mind. Once everything is reassigned, the sentence sounded different now. What she had believed to be strategic confidence had become documented intent. The following morning, Daniel Reeves initiated a deeper forensic audit under Harborcrest's authority. With executive control suspended, full access to internal ledgers became permissible. He began tracing payments not only to Hale Strategic Advisory LLC, but from that LLC to secondary accounts. Within 48 hours, the audit revealed layered transfers, smaller distributions to personal accounts, expense reimbursements labeled strategic travel luxury hospitality charges. The amounts were not catastrophic individually. Together they formed a pattern. Daniel compiled the findings into a comprehensive financial summary and sent it to Eleanor and Hadley. Total transferred to Hale Strategic Advisory LLC, $1,874,000. Secondary disbursements to personal accounts, $612,000. Unsubstantiated expenses, $148,000. Hadley read the report without visible change in posture. She contacted Eleanor. Next step, she asked. Civil filing for breach of fiduciary duty, Eleanor replied, and dissipation of capital assets. Include audio documentation, already appended. The filing was submitted in federal district court within the week. Gregory received notice while seated at his temporary office, no longer in the executive suite, but in a smaller interior workspace reassigned during suspension. He read the header twice. Cox Holdings via Harborcrest Strategic Partners plaintiff. His hands went still. Cox Holdings, the name he had seen on framed philanthropic plaques. The name he had married without understanding. He called Hadley immediately. Cox Holdings, he asked, voice low. Yes, she replied. You're suing me. I am enforcing contract. For nearly $2 million. For documented breach. He swallowed. You could have handled this privately. You chose public structure, she answered. He had no response. That evening, Vanessa arrived at his office unannounced. They filed, she said, closing the door behind her. I know. They're alleging dissipation. They have records. Her composure thinned. You approved those transfers. I delegated authority, he corrected reflexively. You signed them, she said. Silence settled. For the first time, accountability separated them. Vanessa's phone buzzed with a notification. A journalist inquiry. Suspension rumors had begun circulating. Gregory leaned back in his chair. They won't convict without proof of intent, he said. They have the recording, she replied quietly. Intent. The word had changed shape. Back home, Hadley prepared documentation for discovery. Email chains were organized chronologically. Financial reports tabbed. Audio transcripts certified. She did not rush. Precision was more important than speed. Eleanor reviewed strategy during a late afternoon meeting. The strength of this case is structure, she said. You financed the project through legitimate channels. He executed delegation without consent. Funds correlate directly to that delegation. And Vanessa Hadley asked. Her LLC becomes co-defendant. Hadley nodded. There was no anger when Vanessa's name was spoken. Only sequence. Gregory's legal team filed a counterclaim alleging overreach and marital interference. Eleanor expected it. They'll argue you used concealed ownership to entrap him, she explained. Hadley considered the word entrap. He signed voluntarily, she said. Yes. And he had access to the same contract language I did. Yes. Then there is no entrapment. Eleanor met her gaze. No. The discovery phase moved quickly. Under court order, Gregory was required to surrender corporate devices for review. Vanessa's communications were subpoenaed. Emails surfaced that were not part of Harborcrest's internal archive. Private exchanges, strategic discussions. One message from Vanessa read, "If she never understands the structure, we can reposition everything." Gregory's reply, "She doesn't look closely." The timestamp preceded the authority shift by 3 days. When Hadley read the message, her expression did not change. She wrote in her notebook, March 22nd, confirmed misjudgment of observation. The irony was not lost on her. Gregory returned home late one evening to find the house unusually quiet. Hadley sat in the living room reading. He stood across from her, uncertain. "I underestimated you," he said finally. "Yes," she replied. He swallowed. "I didn't think you were watching." "I wasn't watching," she said calmly. "I was recording." He sat down slowly. "Is there any version of this where we resolve it without destroying everything?" Hadley closed her book. "You destroyed structure when you attempted to move it without consent." "I was trying to build something larger." "You were trying to move control," she corrected. He lowered his gaze. Outside, early spring wind brushed against the windows. Inside, the foundation of Gregory's ambition had shifted irrevocably. The legal process would continue. Bank records would be reviewed in court. Audio transcripts would be read aloud. Emails would be projected onto screens. And Hadley, who had financed his rise without demand for recognition, would not raise her voice once, because the evidence would speak with more clarity than emotion ever could. Public exposure moves differently than private consequence. It does not arrive all at once. It seeps. By early April, the Baltimore Development Project had become a subject of quiet industry conversation. Trade publications used restrained language, temporary capital suspension, executive restructuring, compliance review, but the implication was unmistakable. Instability. Gregory Whitmore had spent years cultivating the image of decisive leadership. Now uncertainty clung to him in boardrooms and networking events alike. The fundraising gala he had scheduled months earlier, intended as a triumphant announcement of the project's next phase, remained on the calendar. Canceling would signal weakness. Proceeding would invite scrutiny. Vanessa insisted they proceed. "Optics matter," she said, seated across from him in his reduced office space. "If you retreat, you validate their narrative." "Our narrative," Gregory asked quietly, "that this is procedural overreach." He studied her carefully. Her confidence was still intact, but thinner around the edges. Subpoena notifications had been delivered to her apartment 3 days earlier. Her legal counsel had advised caution in all communication. "We host the event," Gregory decided finally. "We control the room." Control. The word sounded increasingly fragile. Across town, Hadley received a forwarded invitation through a mutual philanthropic contact. Whitmore Urban Development Vision Forward Gala. She examined the embossed lettering without visible reaction. Eleanor called later that afternoon. "They're going ahead with the gala," she said. "That's bold." "It's consistent," Hadley replied. "With what?" "With his pattern." Eleanor paused. "Will you attend?" Hadley closed the invitation slowly. "Yes, not for confrontation. For documentation." The evening of the gala unfolded beneath crystal chandeliers in a restored historic hotel overlooking the harbor. Donors, city officials, investors, all dressed in formal restraint, moved through the ballroom with measured curiosity. Whispers traveled faster than champagne refills. Gregory stood near the stage posture, composed smile calibrated. Vanessa remained beside him, poised, her presence carefully professional. When Hadley entered, she did so without announcement. She wore black, minimal jewelry, hair drawn back simply, several heads turned not because of spectacle, but because of timing. Gregory saw her from across the room. For a brief second, something like hesitation crossed his face. Then he straightened. He approached her before she could approach him. "I didn't know you were coming," he said evenly. "You sent an invitation," she replied. He nodded once. "Tonight is about the future of the project." "I understand." He searched her expression for hostility. There was none, only observation. The program began with a string quartet and a short video presentation, highlighting architectural renderings and community impact projections. When Gregory stepped onto the stage, applause followed, polite, measured. He spoke with practiced clarity about resilience, adaptation, and vision. He did not mention the suspension. He framed recent events as temporary administrative recalibration. Vanessa watched from the side of the stage, her posture unwavering. Hadley remained seated near the back, hands folded lightly in her lap. Midway through Gregory's speech, a notification vibrated silently in her purse. Eleanor. Hadley excused herself discreetly and stepped into the hallway to answer. "The court has granted preliminary asset preservation," Eleanor said. "Effective immediately." Scope, Hadley asked calmly. "Personal and corporate accounts tied to Hale Strategic Advisory, LLC. Temporary freeze pending review." Hadley absorbed the information without visible change in breathing. "Understood," she said. She returned to the ballroom as Gregory concluded his remarks. Leadership, he was saying, requires courage to move forward despite resistance. Applause followed. Moments later, Vanessa's phone buzzed sharply in her hand. She glanced at the screen. Her composure faltered, barely perceptible, but enough. Gregory noticed. She leaned toward him and whispered something. He frowned. "What?" he asked quietly. She showed him the screen. "Asset freeze notification, Hale Strategic Advisory, LLC." The color drained from his face. In the ballroom, conversation continued unaware. Gregory stepped away from the podium, microphone still live. "What does that mean?" he asked under his breath. "It means they moved," Vanessa replied, voice tight. "They can't freeze without full hearing." "They just did." Hadley watched from her seat. She did not smile. She did not stand. She simply observed the shift in Gregory's posture, the first genuine loss of equilibrium she had witnessed in public. The microphone emitted a faint feedback hum. Gregory realized it was still active and turned it off abruptly. Murmurs began rippling through the room. Vanessa stepped back from him instinctively, as though proximity now carried risk. Within minutes, several guests' phones vibrated simultaneously. Financial news alerts. Court filing confirmed. Executive litigation escalates. Gregory returned to the stage, attempting composure. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice steadier than his pulse. "There have been procedural updates this evening. I assure you the project remains viable." The assurance felt rehearsed and hollow. In the back of the room, Hadley rose quietly and made her way toward the exit. Gregory saw her leaving. For a fraction of a second, he considered calling her name. He did not. Outside, the night air was cool and clear. Hadley paused at the top of the hotel steps. Her phone vibrated again. "Daniel." "Freeze confirmed across linked accounts," he said. Secondary transfers halted. "Thank you," she replied. "Media inquiries are increasing." "They will." She ended the call and stood still for a moment. Inside the ballroom, applause had resumed, thin, uncertain. Gregory continued speaking, attempting to project stability. Vanessa stood slightly apart now, her phone clutched tightly. Public unraveling is rarely explosive. It is incremental. By the end of the evening, 3 investors had quietly postponed commitments. 2 city officials declined further comment. Gregory left the stage to find Vanessa gone. Her final message to him arrived 20 minutes later. "We need separate counsel." He stared at the screen. Separate. The word carried implications he had not anticipated. Back home, Hadley removed her heels and placed them neatly by the door. She opened her notebook. April 6th. Asset freeze executed during public event. Investor response, cautious withdrawal. She closed the notebook and placed it beside her bed. Gregory did not return home that night. Momentum had once made him feel invincible. Now, it felt like gravity pulling steadily downward. And Hadley, who had never raised her voice in the ballroom, had altered the trajectory of his ascent without speaking a single word. Because contracts once enforced do not require spectacle. They require sequence. The morning after the gala did not bring outrage. It brought paperwork. By 8:30 a.m., 3 formal withdrawal notices had been delivered to Gregory Whitmore's office. 2 subcontractors requested payment assurances before continuing site work. A city liaison emailed a brief inquiry regarding stability concerns. Momentum had not collapsed. It had stalled. Gregory sat alone in his reduced office space jacket draped over the back of his chair collar unbuttoned. The television mounted on the wall played muted financial news. A scrolling headline at the bottom referenced executive authority dispute in Baltimore development. His name was not yet prominent, but it would be. Vanessa arrived shortly before 9. She did not sit immediately. "My accounts are frozen," she said. "I know." "Personal accounts, too." "Yes." She crossed her arms. "This escalated because you let it escalate." Gregory looked up slowly. I let it. You underestimated her. The word her no longer required clarification. Gregory leaned back in his chair. She structured this long before any of us knew. Vanessa's composure thinned. She concealed ownership. She structured ownership, he corrected. Silence lingered. We need unified defense, she said finally. Our counsel advised separate representation, Gregory replied. Her expression hardened. Convenient. For both of us. That was the first moment distance formed between them. Across town, Hadley met with Eleanor Grant and Daniel Reeves in a conference room that overlooked the river. The morning light was pale but steady. Daniel distributed updated financial summaries. Following the asset freeze, he explained we've confirmed attempted outgoing transfers from Hale Strategic Advisory LLC early this morning. They were blocked. Timing, Hadley asked. 6:12 a.m. Before council consultation, Eleanor noted. Likely precautionary behavior, Daniel added. Hadley folded her hands. Included in supplemental filing. Eleanor nodded. The preliminary hearing is scheduled for next week, she said. Opposing counsel has requested mediation. On what basis, Hadley asked. Settlement to avoid protracted litigation. Hadley considered the word settlement. Prepare terms, she said, but do not offer leniency without admission. Eleanor studied her. You're prepared to proceed publicly? Yes, not because she wanted exposure, but because concealment had already been used against structure. Later that afternoon, Gregory received formal service of Hadley's separate filing for dissolution of marriage. Petition for divorce, filed in district court. He read the header twice. Irreconcilable differences. Breach of fiduciary duty within marital asset structure. His hands remained steady, but something inside him shifted definitively. He drove home without calling ahead. Hadley was in the living room reviewing documents. He placed the divorce petition on the coffee table between them. You filed, he said. Yes. You didn't warn me. I documented. This isn't documentation, he said, voice tightening. This is termination. She looked at him evenly. You terminated structure when you attempted to remove it. He shook his head. I made business decisions. You made personal decisions funded by marital capital. He stepped closer. You're dismantling everything. No, she replied calmly. I am separating it. Silence filled the room. Is there any part of you that regrets this? He asked. Hadley considered the question carefully. I regret that it was necessary. He laughed once, short and hollow. I didn't know you were capable of this. You didn't look closely. The echo of his own email returned to him. He looked away first. The preliminary hearing arrived faster than Gregory anticipated. Federal district courtrooms are less dramatic than people imagine. Fluorescent lighting. Wood benches polished by routine. A quiet hum of procedural order. Judge Miriam Keller presided with restrained precision. Eleanor Grant presented first. She outlined the contract structure, the unauthorized delegation, the financial transfers, the recorded statements of intent. She did not dramatize. She did not raise her voice. Daniel Reeves testified to the financial trail, explaining correlation between authority shift and compensation spike. Gregory's counsel argued that operational delegation was within executive discretion and that consulting payments were performance-based. Judge Keller reviewed the audio transcript carefully. Mr. Whitmore, she said evenly, did you state once everything is reassigned, they'll have to accept it? Gregory's throat tightened. Yes. Were you aware that reassignment required governing authority consent? Yes. Did you obtain that consent? No. Silence settled across the courtroom. Judge Keller made a brief note. Preliminary finding indicates sufficient cause to maintain asset preservation and proceed to civil review, she concluded. Mediation may be attempted, but enforcement remains active. The gavel did not slam. It tapped. Decisions rarely require theatrics. Outside the courtroom, Vanessa stood apart from Gregory. Her counsel advised minimal interaction. Reporters lingered at the courthouse steps, though most questions were directed at legal representatives rather than principals. Hadley exited through a side corridor as advised. She did not address cameras. Back home that evening, Gregory sat alone at the kitchen table. The house felt larger than it had in years. He looked at the leather notebook resting near Hadley's usual seat. He did not open it. Upstairs, Hadley closed a file and placed it into a labeled archive box. April 12th. Preliminary hearing complete. Asset preservation upheld. She paused before adding another line. Marriage dissolution initiated. Her handwriting did not waver. In a downtown apartment across the harbor, Vanessa met with her attorney. Exposure risk, she asked. Significant, he replied plainly. The financial pattern and recorded statements are difficult to contextualize favorably. She exhaled slowly. We positioned for growth. You positioned without consent, he corrected. Consent. The word had threaded through every document, every argument, every ruling. Back in the Whitmore home, Gregory walked into the living room where Hadley sat reading. Did you ever love me? He asked quietly. She looked up. Yes. Before this? Yes. And now? She closed her book gently. I love structure, she said softly. And you chose to move it. He nodded once. There was no defense left. The legal process would continue. Mediation would be attempted. Financial restitution would be calculated. But something more permanent than money had already been decided. Momentum had once defined Gregory. Now consequence did. And Hadley, who had never raised her voice in court or ballroom, had ensured that the record, not emotion, would carry the weight of truth. Mediation was scheduled for the final week of April. Unlike court mediation rooms are designed to feel less adversarial, softer lighting oval tables instead of rose water pitchers instead of microphones. The illusion is intentional. It suggests resolution is still a shared goal. For Gregory Whitmore, it felt like a narrowing corridor. He arrived with his attorney 20 minutes early. Vanessa was scheduled separately, represented by independent counsel. The separation had become both legal and personal. Hadley entered through a different hallway. She wore gray, not black, not white, neutral. Eleanor Grant walked beside her, a slim leather folder tucked under one arm. Daniel Reeves was not present. His reports had already been submitted into evidence. The mediator, a retired federal judge, greeted each party with measured calm. We are here to explore resolution, he began, not to revisit what has already been documented. Gregory glanced briefly at Hadley. She did not return the look. The financial summary was projected onto a small screen. Total capital exposure, $1.874 million transferred. Secondary unsubstantiated distributions, $612,000. Projected reputational impact unquantified. Gregory's attorney spoke first. My client acknowledges procedural misjudgment, but disputes characterization of intentional breach. Eleanor's reply was immediate and steady. Intent is documented. The audio transcript was referenced again. Not replayed. It no longer needed to be. Gregory cleared his throat. I believed I was acting within operational discretion, he said. I did not understand the ownership structure. Hadley's gaze remained forward. Ownership was not concealed. Eleanor responded. It was simply not announced. The mediator interjected gently. Mr. Whitmore, had you reviewed the governance clause in full prior to delegation? Yes, Gregory admitted. And did it require consent? Yes. The mediator nodded once. Then the matter is less about awareness and more about choice. The word choice lingered. Vanessa's counsel attempted a separate argument that her client operated under executive authorization and was not responsible for internal governance compliance. Eleanor countered with time-stamped email excerpts demonstrating Vanessa's awareness of required consent. She wrote, "If she never understands the structure," Eleanor said calmly. That indicates recognition of structure. Vanessa did not look up. Mediation lasted 4 hours. At its conclusion, preliminary settlement terms were drafted. Full restitution of unsubstantiated transfers. Resignation of Gregory Whitmore from executive leadership in the Baltimore project. Permanent removal of Hale Strategic Advisory LLC from contractual involvement. Suta sur civil dissolution of marriage under structured asset division aligned with prenuptial agreement terms. Gregory read the document slowly. You're removing me entirely, he said quietly. Hadley spoke for the first time during mediation. I am removing risk. The mediator watched her carefully. Miss Cox, he asked, is reconciliation an objective in any dimension of this proceeding? Hadley considered the question. No, she said. Not coldly, not angrily, simply clearly. Gregory closed his eyes briefly. There are moments when a person realizes that negotiation is no longer about preservation, but about exit. By early May, The Baltimore Project's executive board announced interim leadership appointed directly by Harbor Crest. Gregory's name was absent from the press release. Industry commentary shifted tone from curiosity to conclusion. Vanessa's professional website went offline. Her LLC entered voluntary dissolution proceedings. The legal settlement was finalized 2 weeks later in court before Judge Miriam Keller. Mr. Whitmore, the judge, said evenly, "You are relinquishing executive authority and agreeing to restitution. Do you enter this agreement voluntarily?" "Yes, Miss Cox." "Do you affirm the terms as presented?" "I do." The gavel tapped once. Marriage dissolved. Civil enforcement retained pending restitution completion. Outside the courthouse, there were no cameras this time. The story had lost novelty. Gregory walked toward his car alone. He paused once as if considering whether to turn back. He did not. Hadley exited through the side corridor again. Eleanor walked beside her in silence. "Are you all right?" Eleanor asked finally. "Yes," Hadley replied. Relief, clarity. Back at the house that would soon be sold under asset division terms, Gregory stood in the empty living room. Furniture had already been appraised. The walls felt unfamiliar without framed photographs. He looked toward the staircase where Hadley once descended each morning with quiet predictability. He had mistaken predictability for complacency. Upstairs, Hadley packed the final archive box. Inside it lay printed email chains, bank records, audio transcripts, a copy of the Harbor Crest founding charter bearing her signature. She placed her leather notebook on top. 8 months of entries, not emotional reflections. Records. She did not open it again. On her way out of the house, she paused in the kitchen. For a moment, memory pressed gently against structure. Early mornings, shared coffee, conversations that once carried hope rather than defense. She allowed the memory to exist without rewriting it. Then she stepped outside. The air carried the softness of early summer. Gregory stood near his car. He did not approach her. After a long moment, he spoke. "I never thought you'd leave this way." "I didn't either," she replied. He nodded slowly. "I underestimated you." "Yes." He almost smiled at the repetition. "I thought strength was visible," he said. "It rarely is," she answered. Silence followed. "I did love you," he said. "I know. And you?" "I loved who you were before you tried to move what wasn't yours." He absorbed that quietly. There was no anger left in the exchange. Only recognition. Hadley walked to her car. She did not look back. Gregory remained standing in the driveway long after her vehicle disappeared from view. Momentum had once driven him forward. Now reflection held him still. And Hadley, who had never raised her voice or sought spectacle, had exited not in triumph, but in alignment with the structure she had always honored. The legal documents were signed. The restitution schedule established. The marriage concluded. But what endured was something quieter, a record. And in that record, truth required no volume. Discovery did not end with settlement. It refined it. Although Gregory Whitmore had agreed to restitution and relinquishment of executive authority, the court required full financial disclosure to ensure compliance with the settlement structure. Asset tracing continued not as accusation now, but as verification. Verification is quieter than confrontation. It is also more revealing. Daniel Reeves resumed his work under formal court supervision. With access expanded through judicial order, he reviewed not only corporate transfers, but personal communications that intersected with financial decisions. Patterns sharpened under scrutiny. 3 days after the executive authority shift, Vanessa had sent Gregory a private message. "If she never understands the funding structure, we'll be insulated." Gregory's reply had been brief. "She doesn't look closely." The timestamp preceded the first significant spike in consulting transfers. Intent layered over action. When Daniel compiled the final discovery report, he included contextual sequencing, how language aligned with movement of capital, how reassignment correlated with financial benefit. He forwarded the report to Eleanor. Eleanor forwarded it to Hadley with a single line. "This closes exposure." Hadley read the document late that evening in her temporary apartment overlooking the river. She no longer lived in the house she had shared with Gregory. The new space was smaller, simpler, intentionally transitional. She read without interruption. When she finished, she opened her notebook one final time. May 18th. Discovery complete. Pattern confirmed. She paused, then added, No further ambiguity. She closed the notebook and did not reopen it. Meanwhile, Vanessa Hale met with her attorney in a quiet downtown office. The Discovery Supplement strengthens their civil position, he explained. I signed nothing without executive authorization, Vanessa said, voice steady but thinner than before. Authorization does not override awareness of structural consent requirements, he replied. She looked toward the window. Do I have criminal exposure? At present, no, he answered. But civil liability remains substantial. Her silence carried calculation. Public perception had already shifted. Industry contacts were distant. Consulting invitations had ceased. Strategic partnership had become legal caution. Across the city, Gregory sat in a rented apartment furnished sparsely and temporarily. He reviewed the Discovery Supplement alone. The language was precise, not vindictive, not embellished, just aligned. He reached the email excerpt, his own words about Hadley not looking closely. He read the sentence 3 times. The irony was no longer sharp. It was instructive. He closed the document and leaned back against the couch. For the first time in months, he allowed stillness without planning response. Hadley met with Eleanor the following morning to finalize compliance confirmation. Restitution schedule begins next month, Eleanor said. Executive removal is permanent. Hadley nodded. Vanessa's counsel is negotiating individual liability reduction, Eleanor added. Based on cooperation, Hadley asked. Yes. Hadley absorbed that without visible reaction. Will it alter outcome? Not materially. Hadley stood and gathered her folder. Then proceed. Outside, the air had shifted fully into summer warmth. The legal process had consumed nearly 9 months. It had begun with overlooked clauses and ended with structured separation. Later that afternoon, Gregory requested a meeting, not through counsel. Directly, Hadley considered the message before responding. She agreed to meet in a public cafe overlooking the harbor. Neutral ground. They sat across from one another at a small outdoor table. The water moved steadily beyond them, unaffected by litigation. I read the Discovery Supplement, Gregory began. Yes, I didn't realize how clearly the pattern aligned. You weren't looking for alignment, she replied. He nodded slowly. I was looking for validation. She regarded him calmly. Validation from whom? From someone who believed in my ambition. Ambition doesn't require concealment, she said. He exhaled. I thought you were detached. I was observant. Silence stretched between them, not tense, but reflective. Vanessa is negotiating cooperation, he said quietly. I know. Are you pursuing maximum liability? I am pursuing completion. He studied her face. No anger, he observed. Anger clouds structure. He almost smiled. You've said that before. Yes. A breeze moved lightly across the water. For what it's worth, he said, I didn't intend to dismantle us. You intended to reassign control, she corrected gently. You misjudged the cost. He nodded. That's accurate. There was no apology dramatic enough to bridge what had occurred, and none was requested. They finished their coffee without further legal discussion. When they stood to leave, Gregory hesitated. Will you ever speak of this publicly, he asked. No, Hadley replied. Why? Because the record already exists. He accepted that. In the weeks that followed, Vanessa entered into a civil cooperation agreement reducing her restitution burden in exchange for sworn clarification of communication timelines. Her testimony did not alter outcome. It confirmed it. Judge Miriam Keller reviewed final compliance filings in chambers and issued a closing statement in the civil docket. Settlement terms satisfied pending structured restitution. No further injunctive relief required. Case administratively concluded. Administrative conclusion rarely feels dramatic. It feels quiet. On the day the docket closed, Hadley walked along the river path alone. No phone calls, no legal briefings, no notebook. The water moved with indifferent steadiness. She thought briefly of the first gala crystal chandeliers, polite laughter, Gregory's public dismissal. She did not relive it. She contextualized it. Gregory, in his apartment across town, received confirmation of case closure via email. He read the line. Case administratively concluded. He stared at it for a long time. Conclusion does not erase consequence. It simply formalizes it. He placed the phone face down and looked around the small room. For the first time since suspension, there was no next motion to file, no argument to prepare, only reflection. Hadley returned to her apartment as evening settled. She placed the final legal binder onto a shelf, not hidden, not displayed. Documented. Completed. She did not feel victory. She felt alignment. Structure restored. Autonomy reclaimed. And silence, once mistaken for weakness, proved once again to be the most durable form of strength. Closure in the eyes of the court did not immediately translate to restoration in the world Gregory Whitmore once moved through. Reputation lingers longer than litigation. By early summer, industry publications had shifted from cautious neutrality to quiet recalibration. Whitmore Urban Development was now described as formerly led by Gregory Whitmore. Interim leadership under Harbor Crest had stabilized the Baltimore project sufficiently to prevent collapse. Contractors resumed work under stricter oversight. Investors returned selectively, reassured by governance clarity. Gregory watched these developments from a distance. He had not been barred from the industry entirely. He was not criminally charged. He was not publicly disgraced in dramatic fashion. He was simply no longer central, and for a man who had equated centrality with worth, that absence felt sharper than accusation. Meanwhile, Hadley Cox resumed her position openly within Cox Holdings. There had been no need for public announcement. Her name already existed in regulatory filings. Beneficial ownership structures had never been illegal, only discreet. Now, discretion carried context. At the next quarterly governance meeting, she sat at the head of the polished oak table. Senior analysts reviewed performance metrics. Legal counsel summarized post-litigation compliance adjustments. No one referenced Gregory by name. They referenced the Baltimore case. Structure absorbs individual narrative. After the meeting, one board member approached Hadley privately. "You handled that with restraint," he said. "I handled it with documentation," she replied. He nodded, recognizing the distinction. In a separate office across the city, Vanessa Hale signed the final restitution installment agreement. Her cooperation affidavit had been incorporated into the civil record. It had not protected her reputation, but it had reduced prolonged litigation risk. She had not spoken to Gregory in weeks. Their last exchange had been procedural. Separate counsel, separate liability. Strategic partnership dissolved into parallel consequence. On a warm afternoon in June, Hadley received a brief email from Gregory. Subject: request for conversation. She considered it for several hours before responding. They met again at the same Harbor Cafe. He looked different, not physically diminished, but quieter. "Thank you for meeting," he began. "You're welcome." He folded his hands carefully on the table. "I've been offered a consulting role," he said. "Not executive, advisory." She listened without reaction. "It's smaller," he added, "but structured." "Structure is not small," she said. He almost smiled. "I understand that now." Silence moved between them comfortably, not tense. "I've been replaying everything," he continued. "Not the lawsuit. The months before." She waited. "I convinced myself that secrecy was strategic." "It was defensive," she said gently. "Yes." He nodded once. "I mistook your quiet for disinterest." "You mistook it for absence," she corrected. He exhaled slowly. "Is there anything you would have done differently?" Hadley considered the question seriously. "I would have asked earlier whether you were seeking partnership or validation," she said. He absorbed that. "I was seeking admiration." "Admiration without accountability dissolves," she replied. The water behind them moved in small, consistent waves. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "You don't need forgiveness," she answered calmly. "You need understanding." "And you?" he asked. "I have it." He looked at her then, not with resentment, not with longing, with recognition. Their marriage had not ended in spectacle. It had ended in exposure of imbalance. An imbalance, once documented, cannot be unseen. Across town, Vanessa packed the final contents of her office into a cardboard box. The framed certificates, the strategic planning binders, the branded folders bearing her LLC's logo. She paused over her business card holder. Vanessa Hale, Strategic Advisory. The title felt detached from present reality. She placed the cards into the box without tearing them. Not denial. Just conclusion. Later that week, Judge Miriam Keller attended a private judicial panel discussion on corporate governance. During a Quanda session, she referenced a recent case unnamed, illustrating the importance of consent clauses in executive delegation. "Ambition," she said evenly, "does not nullify contract." The audience nodded. In governance circles, the lesson circulated quietly. Back at Cox Holdings, Hadley initiated a new internal compliance module. Enhanced consent verification triggers for executive delegation within portfolio companies. Not because of Gregory alone. Because structure evolves after stress. Her assistant noticed the additional oversight protocols. Precaution, he asked. Refinement, she replied. One evening, months after the final filing, Hadley returned to the river path where she had walked the day the case closed. The sun set slowly over the water. She carried no notebook, no documents, no pending motions, only stillness. She thought briefly of the ballroom months earlier, crystal chandeliers, public dismissal. She did not feel humiliation. She felt distance. That moment had not defined her. It had revealed him. And revelation once illuminated does not require retaliation. Gregory, in his smaller office across town, signed his new advisory contract. The title read Senior Consultant, Operational Review. No executive authority. No unilateral delegation. Structured oversight embedded within every clause. He read each line carefully before signing. Ink pressed into fiber. He paused after the signature, aware now of what it meant. Consent. Alignment. Accountability. He closed the folder slowly. Across the city, Vanessa submitted a new business registration application, this time as an individual consultant without layered LLC structures. Transparency by necessity. Learning by consequence. In separate spaces, 3 lives adjusted to recalibrated reality. Hadley did not rebuild what had dissolved. She redirected. Her investments shifted toward renewable infrastructure and community bonds. Quiet capital, measured growth. No gala announcements, no spectacle, only documentation. Late one evening, as she prepared to leave her office, Eleanor Grant stopped by unannounced. Everything closed cleanly, Eleanor said. No residual exposure. Good, Hadley replied. Eleanor studied her. You never sought public vindication. It was never about vindication. Then, what was it about? Consent, Hadley said simply. Eleanor nodded once. There are cases that burn brightly in headlines, and there are cases that recalibrate quietly in boardrooms. This had been the latter. Hadley locked her office door and stepped into the evening. She did not look back, not because she was fleeing, but because she had already aligned forward. An alignment once restored requires no further defense. Summer settled over the city with a steadiness that felt almost instructional. Nothing rushed. Nothing demanded spectacle. The river moved at its own pace. Construction cranes resumed their slow choreography along the Baltimore waterfront, and the Baltimore Development Project, now under interim leadership appointed by Harbor Crest, advanced with measured, documented precision. Press coverage shifted tone once more, stabilized. Governance realigned. Capital confidence restored. Gregory Whitmore's name appeared only in archived articles. Absence can be louder than scandal. In his new advisory role at a mid-sized logistics consultancy, Gregory occupied a glass office without a corner view. The firm specialized in operational efficiency, reviews no public-facing visionary leadership, no gala speeches. His first assignment required him to evaluate executive delegation risk within a regional distribution company. He read the client's governance charter carefully. He underlined clauses about consent. He requested clarification on oversight triggers. The junior analyst assigned to assist him noticed the thoroughness. Most consultants skim this section, she said casually. Gregory paused before answering. That's how errors begin, he replied. He did not elaborate. Meanwhile, Vanessa Hale rebuilt quietly. She did not launch a new website immediately. She did not announce rebranding. Instead, she accepted smaller contracts, short-term brand audits, structured strategy consultations under transparent billing frameworks. She attended no galas. She requested no co-signature authority. The lesson had not been abstract. It had been recorded. Across the city, Hadley Cox stood on a modest stage at a municipal infrastructure symposium, an event far removed from crystal chandeliers and champagne flutes. Her presentation was titled, Consent as Capital. The room was filled with city planners, governance advisors, and investment officers. She did not mention Gregory. She did not reference litigation. She spoke instead about structural clarity. Capital, she said evenly, is not leverage without consent. Governance exists not to slow ambition, but to protect sustainability. Her tone was steady, unadorned. No applause interrupted her. When she finished, the applause was measured, but sincere. Afterward, a young city official approached her. "Your framework seems personal," he said carefully. "It is structural," she replied. He nodded, sensing more, but not asking. That evening, Hadley returned to her apartment and opened a small box she had not revisited since moving. Inside were personal photographs from early in her marriage. Smiles that had once been uncomplicated. Shared vacations, unaware beginnings. She studied one photo, Gregory laughing at something outside the frame. She did not feel anger. She felt context. She placed the photographs back into the box, not as erasure, but as archival memory. There is a difference. In early August, Gregory received notice that his restitution schedule had been fully satisfied. His final installment cleared without issue. He read the confirmation email twice. Financial obligation concluded. The legal language felt transactional, but something quieter shifted inside him. Completion did not restore what had dissolved. It acknowledged consequence. He drove that evening to the harbor and parked near the cafe where he and Hadley had met twice since litigation began. He did not enter. He sat in the car, watching the water move under fading light. He did not call her. He did not compose a message. Closure does not require conversation when understanding has already been reached. At Cox Holdings, Hadley authorized the final internal memo closing the Baltimore Review case file. Subject Case B-117. Governance restoration completed. No personal note attached. No commentary. Just documentation. Daniel Reeves archived the financial audit reports into long-term secure storage. Eleanor Grant updated her case log and marked the matter resolved. Judge Miriam Keller referenced the case once more in a private judicial ethics seminar as an example of how restraint can coexist with enforcement. Quiet ripples continued. Late summer brought an invitation to Hadley from a National Investment Council to serve on a regulatory advisory panel. She accepted. Her work expanded not louder, but broader. Gregory, in his advisory role, declined an offer to co-author an industry article about lessons in executive flexibility. He suggested instead the topic be reframed. Lessons in executive consent, he proposed. The editorial board accepted. The article published under his name months later. It did not mention Harbor Crest. It did not mention Hadley. But its language reflected a recalibrated understanding. Vanessa read the article when it circulated. She did not reach out. She closed the browser window and returned to her client strategy document. Different trajectories. Same lesson. On a cool September evening, Hadley attended a small private dinner hosted by Cox Holdings board members. Conversation centered on renewable infrastructure expansion and municipal trust partnerships. At one point, a board member raised a toast. "To stability," he said. Hadley lifted her glass. "To consent," she replied softly. The word carried weight beyond the table. Later that night, walking home beneath streetlights, she felt something unfamiliar, not triumph, lightness. Not because she had prevailed, but because she no longer carried the need to monitor. The notebook had remained closed for months. No more timestamps. No more documented suspicion. Just presence. In a separate part of the city, Gregory closed his office laptop and paused before leaving for the night. He reviewed one final clause in a client contract. Delegation of authority requires written consent from governing oversight. He smiled faintly at the familiarity. He signed, carefully. He turned off the office lights and stepped into the hallway. Ambition had once defined him. Now alignment did. Hadley stood by her apartment window, watching the city skyline. The cranes along the waterfront moved slowly against the darkening sky. The project continued, not under his name, under structure. She did not feel satisfaction in that fact. She felt consistency. Months earlier, she had stood in a ballroom and absorbed public dismissal without raising her voice. Tonight, there was no ballroom, no audience, no documentation required, only quiet equilibrium. Some stories end with confrontation. Some end with humiliation reversed. This one ended with restoration, not of marriage, not of reputation, but of balance. And balance, once restored, does not announce itself. It simply remains. Autumn arrived without ceremony. The trees along the river surrendered their leaves gradually, as though even change preferred subtlety. The Baltimore waterfront project reached its first major milestone under interim leadership foundation structures, completed public walkways outlined in steel and concrete. No gala marked the achievement. A short press release circulated instead. Harbor Crest strategic partners reaffirmed long-term commitment. Community stakeholders expressed confidence. Hadley read the release once and closed it. She did not attend the site visit. She did not need to. Stability no longer required her presence in the foreground. At Cox Holdings, the quarterly review reflected strong portfolio performance. Renewable infrastructure investments outpaced projections. Municipal bond returns remained steady. The Baltimore case had become a footnote in internal summaries. Governance stress event resolved. Stress event. The phrasing was accurate. Stress reveals fault lines, and fault lines once mapped can be reinforced. Late one afternoon, Hadley remained in her office after most staff had left. The city outside the windows shifted into amber dusk. She opened her leather notebook, not to document, but to close. The first entry dated back nearly a year. Short lines, observations, timestamps. She read several pages slowly, not to relive, to acknowledge. There was no anger in the handwriting, no exclamation marks. Only record. She turned to the final entry. May 18th. Discovery complete. Pattern confirmed. She traced her finger lightly across the ink. Then, she closed the notebook and placed it into a drawer. Not discarded. Archived. Across town, Gregory Whitmore stood at the edge of a different construction site. One of his consultancy clients had invited him to observe a distribution center redesign. He listened as junior managers explained workflow improvements. He asked measured questions. He did not assume authority. He requested documentation. When a manager suggested bypassing a minor approval step to save time, Gregory shook his head gently. Shortcuts look efficient until they become exposure, he said. The manager nodded, taking note. Gregory felt something settle in him. Not regret exactly, but recalibration. After the site visit, he drove toward the harbor without planning to. The water reflected the fading light in fractured gold. He stepped out of the car and walked along the familiar path. He did not expect to see her. He did not. But the space carried memory. Not painful, instructive. He stood there for a long time. On the other side of the city, Vanessa Hale finalized her last outstanding restitution payment and closed the dedicated account her attorney had required during litigation. The account balance reached zero. She sat back in her chair and allowed herself one steady breath. She had rebuilt enough to sustain herself, not at the scale she once envisioned, but within structure she now respected. Her new contracts were transparent, her billing straightforward. She no longer sought proximity to executive authority. Influence without consent had proven expensive. That evening, Hadley attended a small gathering hosted by a non-profit urban planning council. No press, no speeches, just conversation. A young architect approached her near the end of the evening. I heard you were involved in stabilizing the waterfront project, he said carefully. I was involved in protecting its structure, she replied. He hesitated. May I ask, how do you stay calm in public crisis? Hadley considered the question. By preparing privately, she said. He nodded thoughtfully. Calm is not absence of feeling. It is discipline applied to feeling. Weeks later, the Baltimore project opened its first public promenade. Families walked along the waterfront under newly installed lights. Children ran along concrete pathways that had once been conceptual drawings in Gregory's presentations. A plaque near the entrance acknowledged Harbor Crest strategic partners for continued capital commitment. No individual names were listed. Structure, not personality. Hadley visited the promenade early one morning before crowds gathered. She walked the length of the pathway slowly. The air carried the scent of salt and steel. She paused at the railing and looked out across the water. There was no need to narrate the past. The project stood. The governance stood. She stood. Gregory read about the promenade opening in a trade newsletter. He closed the article and set his phone aside. He did not feel resentment. He felt consequence. He understood now that leadership without consent is performance. Leadership within consent is sustainability. In late November, Hadley received confirmation that Cox Holdings had been nominated for a Governance Excellence Award. She declined public recognition. Instead, she sent a brief note to her board. Structure performs when respected. That is sufficient. On a quiet evening near the end of the year, snow began falling lightly over the city. Hadley stood by her apartment window, watching the flakes descend in steady silence. A year earlier, she had stood beneath chandeliers absorbing public dismissal. Tonight there was no audience, no accusation, no defense, only stillness. Her phone vibrated softly with a calendar notification. 1 year since the gala. She dismissed the reminder. Anniversaries do not require ceremony. Across the city, Gregory sat at his desk reviewing a client contract under the glow of a single lamp. He paused at a clause requiring explicit consent for structural modification. He read it carefully. He signed. He leaned back and allowed himself a small, measured exhale. Not regret. Understanding. Vanessa, in her smaller office, overlooking a different stretch of river, prepared a proposal for a mid-sized firm seeking brand repositioning. She removed a paragraph suggesting expanded authority language. She replaced it with a line about advisory limitation and documented approval. Experience edits ambition. And somewhere between litigation and restoration, all three of them had been edited. Not erased, not destroyed, refined. Late that night, Hadley turned off the lights and prepared for sleep. She did not think of courtrooms or gala ballrooms. She thought of water moving steadily under moonlight. Balance restored does not feel triumphant. It feels quiet. The ink had dried long ago. The contracts remained, and she walked forward, not vindicated, not vengeful, but aligned. If this story stayed with you, let it sit for a moment. Some victories are loud, others are disciplined. If you believe strength does not need spectacle, you're in the right place. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your city. I like knowing how far quiet stories travel. And if you value stories about accountability, consent, and the kind of resilience that doesn't shout, you're welcome to stay. Subscribe if you'd like to follow more narratives where dignity speaks last and speaks clearly.